Very nice
Let's
to be
start
here.
off with Africa in the greater scheme of things, because a recent PwC report is talking about what the world would look like in 2040 and really says that Asia is going to be the focal point, and Africa doesn't really feature that much. What do you think the biggest problem for Africa right now is? Do you think it's skills and skills development?
Yeah, I don't agree with the report. I mean, I actually think that the reason that China is making such a huge play in Africa is because they see the incredible potential here. We're moving into a Malthusian world where resources are becoming scarcer.
Yeah.
And nothing's going to stop that. And Africa is the most mineral-rich continent on Earth. So I'm afraid to say the report's wrong. Africa is actually going to play a very leading role along with all the other resource-rich neighborhoods in the world. Because, yeah, for the very first time, with the two most populous countries in the world, China and India, going through an industrial revolution, we're running into resource scarcity.
But is this just a case of those countries coming here and using Africa's resources? What does Africa get back for those resources, and how do we benefit the most from this?
Well, I feel that we should take the Chinese approach. I mean, certainly when Anglo was approached to explore for coal or anything else in China, they say, are you going to build a chemicals plant? The first thing they ask you is, what value are you going to add if you find a resource? That's exactly what African countries should be doing. They should be taking a very tough line, that if you want access to my minerals, this is what you have to do.
Have we done this so far, though?
No, we haven't in South Africa, certainly. We haven't. I personally think Johnson Matthey should be building a platinum catalyst plant outside Rustenburg, for example. Why not? You know, why shouldn't we be adding value here? And the same goes for other African countries. It's up to them to negotiate much harder with the Chinese and others, because now they've got the negotiating power.
Well, Clem, you know, when you look at these things that are playing out on the continent, and you've got a lot of multinational companies that operate in various parts of the African continent, it's all great when they come in and they sign the initial forms and foreign direct investment is rife, and then after that we see a lot of regulation come to the fore and red tape, and perhaps that is also scaring investors away. So that could be one of the key elements to Africa being underdeveloped going forward, and Asia then taking the top spot.
Yeah, I would say that there are certain places where it's still happening, but some African countries have really opened for business. Ghana is a fantastic example. It's regarded as a very well-governed and open economy now. Other African countries, we all know there's corruption and there's red tape, or there's civil war. So Africa is a network of winners and losers. But at least what's happening now is that people are saying which are the winners so that we can actually get in.
Well, Clem, where do you see us going from here when it comes to Africa? Is it about skills development and skills accumulation? We have been seeing a lot of multinational companies coming here, bringing their own skills, and then we do see skills transfer. How important is that going to be in the context of African growth?
Absolutely. You know, I mean, we're starting from a low base. There's a lot of education and technology and skills to be transferred into Africa. We all know we're starting from a low base, but, and I come back to this point, we're the third fastest growing region in the world after China and India. I think our growth rate is around about 5.4 as a continent. And yeah, it's going to happen. But what I find interesting is only the Chinese who've really woken up about this. You still have in the West a feeling that Africa, like The Economist said in May 2000, is the hopeless continent. Actually, things have changed, and we're going to see, I think, a huge lift. And that's why the Rand is where it is at the moment. Because guess what? We're seen as the gateway into Africa. First place when you want to do business in Africa is to set up shop in South Africa. So that's why HSBC wants to buy out Nedbank. It's also why Walmart wants to come in here, so that it can spread itself into Africa, because advanced economies for the next 10 years could be a very tough place to do business.
I want to ask you about that, because you mentioned resources right at the beginning, that we have all these resources that China and India need for their industrial development. But are you heartened then to see, first of all, cell phone companies, and we've had Vodafone obviously coming through the continent, Bharti now coming in as well, and retailers and banks also starting to move in, because they do recognize that the African consumer is growing a lot stronger at this point, and that there is a future there, and it's not just about mineral resources.
Yeah, absolutely. It's now covering all fields. And it's because we're living in a two-speed world. I call it the ultraviolet scenario. You have parts of the world in a U and other parts in a V. And the V's are Asia, Africa, South America. And that's why, for example, Australia, you're talking earlier on about the strong currency in Australia. It's because it's part of the V world. It's part of the commodities world linked into China. We're the same. And so everybody's spotting this, and it's not just mining, it's all about the service industries coming here, because actually being a retail outlet in Europe right now is very boring.
Well, Clem, you know, looking at our resources that we're offering to the rest of the world, and this is one of the things that is propping up African growth. And Stephen was alluding to the fact that the African consumer is starting to rise. But are we rising quick enough? Because, you know, when you see the labor scenario that is playing out on the continent, we also need to start seeing African economies start to diversify themselves as well, and perhaps move away from the usual suspects, such as the resource space and, of course, the manufacturing space.
Yeah, but, you know, you've got to be realistic. China's hogging the low-cost manufacturing space. It's very difficult to see Africa suddenly becoming mass producers of PCs and things like that. You know, you've got to define the spaces where you have strengths. So we are still very strong in resources. So, as Stephen quite rightly said, what are we going to do to add value to those resources right now? That's the logical step. Beneficiation, clearly. Obviously retail, because, you know, everybody's shops and does things like that. But in terms of exports, for me, it's the fact that the African continent, you know, is still got the most fantastic tourist opportunities, that Africa actually produces wonderful furniture and, you know, African brands in particular sort of ordinary commodity in shops. I think that Africa simply hasn't fulfilled its potential because, you know, it's got to get its confidence back, and I think it's going to come back. And so my point of view is that it's not just going to be about mining, it's going to be about all the other industries that normally constitute part of a global economy. But we're not going to be the #1 exporter of PCs.
How about niches like generic drug making? We've seen companies like Aspen really shooting up the ranks, moving into Australia as well. It seems to be something that we're quite good at.
Absolutely. We've got pockets of excellence, and we should use them. It's like our you know, automobile industry, which we were just talking about. You know, we make good enough cars to export. So, you know, there are lots of pockets of excellence, but one has to be realistic.
But do we always recognise them, though, and do we actually have the gumption to follow them through?
No, it's one of my big things is we still haven't got onto the right track in terms of saying, what is it that we've got which is really excellent, and how can we raise the performance of other players by saying, you can be like that company or that person. We haven't followed that
yet.
Clem,
you know, you keep saying we've got to regain our confidence as a continent. We've been talked about as the last economic frontier. Everyone's really excited about African growth. And then you see various political scenarios that are playing out on the continent. And unfortunately, we still haven't gotten that right as Africa. When you say regain confidence, what exactly do you mean? How can we do that? Because that also stems from the political scenarios that play out in the oil-producing nations and the gold-producing nations and the resource-rich nations.
Yeah, it's a psychological thing which is related to one of my great heroes, Steve Biko, who said handouts don't improve your self-esteem. Doing it for yourself does. Africa has got to realize the truth of that statement, and its governments have got to stop dominating societies and actually say the real future is with entrepreneurs and people doing it for themselves, because Africa is full of talent, full of entrepreneurs. We've just had this terrible state-dominated universe in Africa, and that's what has meant that the psychology of your average African citizen has been so, you know, so low, because, you know, we've had a terrible kind of big government scenario over Africa, not just big, but corrupt. And, you know, when are we going to say this is a continent of entrepreneurs, and we've got to actually have an environment in which we really back them so that they gain their self-esteem, and then they say, after doing that, we can conquer the world.